El profesor Stan Finney es el presidente de la Comisión Stratigraphy Internacional y profesor de la Universidad del Estado de California. Entre 1996 y 2004, el profesor Finney fue presidente de la Subcomisión Estratigráfica del Ordovícico, periodo en el que se aprobaron y ratificaron todas las series y pisos de este periodo geológico. Ahora, como presidente de la comisión, se destaca su participación activa en el debate acerca del Antropoceno, dándole mayor visibilidad a la comisión y su misión como organización científica. El profesor ofrecerá la conferencia The Anthropocene Epoch, Is it relevant for National Geological Survey? Profesor Finney, bienvenido al auditorio.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, fellow geologists, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here to speak about the Anthropocene. It's not my field of specialization, but as chairman of the Commission on Stratigraphy, it's an issue with which I've had to deal. As you can see by this cover story in The Economist in the year 2011, the concept of the Anthropocene has received considerable public attention in the public and scientific media. Geology's new age, to reflect the impact of humans on the Earth system. I wish to start with events more than 200 years ago, and with this man, who I think you all know well, Alexander von Humboldt. Humboldt was a student of Abraham Werner, who established the first geologic timescale, who worked at Freiburg Mining Academy. Von Humboldt's first position was as a mine inspector, allowed him to travel throughout South Central Europe, seeing a lot of geology, and he's credited with naming the Jurassic system. From 1799 to 1804, he traveled widely in South America. His ascent of Chimborazo inspired his vision of the unity of nature, that is, of the integrated relationships of the Earth system, its living organisms, geology, air, and water. He recognized the impact of humans on the Earth system, particularly deforestation and agriculture, with the cascading effects on soil, water, and climate. He forecast human-induced climate change. Simón Bolívar was inspired by von Humboldt, first meeting him in Paris in 1804, listening to him talk about the wonders of nature as revealed to him during his travels in the Americas, and spending time together with him in Rome. Bolivar used nature to galvanize his compatriots or to explain his political views. He reminded his countrymen that they should learn from forests, rivers, and mountains. You will discover important guides to action in the very nature of our country, which includes the lofty regions of the Andes and the burning shores of the Orinoco, he told the Congress in Bogota. Study them closely, and you will learn there, he urged, what Congress should decree for the happiness of the people of Colombia. Nature, Bolivar said, was the infallible teacher of men. I present these people because to show that the idea of human impact on the Earth system is not new. It has been recorded to varying degrees throughout human history. Where its nature is judged to be deleterious, international organizations, national, regional, and local governments, non-governmental organizations, and industries have taken steps to mitigate and remediate the impact. Just as an example, the dramatic depletion of the ozone layer, particularly above the South Pole, due to chlorofluorocarbons, was recognized in 1985, and the Montreal Agreement was established in 1987 to eliminate chlorofluorocarbons. And it's my understanding that the deterioration of the ozone layer has ceased and is expected that it will be restored to 1950 levels by the year 2018. The incredible public drive for formal recognition of the Anthropocene epoch is based on the desire to reflect the human impact of humans on the Earth system. And the International Commission on Stratigraphy is expected to be the organization that gives this formal recognition. But ICS actually establishes formal stratigraphic units, and they then serve as a basis for the time units of the geologic time scale. My question to you is, should ICS formally recognize the Anthropocene series, not the Anthropocene epoch? And there is a difference there between actual material rock units and time intervals of the past in Earth's history. I present this problem to you, members of national geological surveys, because it is you who are most familiar with the stratigraphic record that might exist for establishment of an Anthropocene series. I seek your opinions. In your experience, is there a stratigraphic record on which to establish a formal chronostratigraphic unit? Would recognition of such a unit be useful for your work? In this presentation, I present to you the extent of discussions on the Anthropocene in scientific and public media, the history and nature of the units formally established by ICS, my concerns about the manner in which proponents present the case for formal recognition of the Anthropocene, and fundamental questions that proponents have failed to address. The term Anthropocene was coined by Paul Crutzen, an atmospheric chemist, at a conference in the early 2000s. But in 2008, members of the Stratigraphic Committee of the Geological Society of London published this article in GSA Today, Are We Now Living in the Anthropocene? And they made suggestions that there is a stratigraphic record on which to recognize and define an Anthropocene. But there was a rebuttal article, Is the Anthropocene an issue of stratigraphy or pop culture? And what these authors argued, focus on the second paragraph here, formal stratigraphic practice uses a codified approach to the development, recognition, and amendment of the time scale relative to Earth's history. Concepts for stratigraphic units require criteria that allow for the definition, delineation, and correlation of stratiform sequences of Earth materials. Time stratigraphic units represent layers of rock containing lithologic, fossil, mineral, chemical, or geophysical signatures that allow for the recognition and measurement of geologic time. But that article in The Economist was followed by an article in Nature, and the editors of Nature felt compelled to comment on this. Geologists are used to dealing with heavy subjects, so who better to decide on one of the most profound debates of the time? Does human impact on the Earth deserve to be formally recognized? Are we now living in a new geologic epoch, the Anthropocene? And I turn your attention to the end of this article. Official recognition of the concept could invite cross-disciplinary science. It would encourage a mindset that will be important not only to fully understand the transformations now occurring, but to take action to control it. And the last sentence, the first step is to recognize, as the term Anthropocene invites us to do, that we are in the driver's seat. Since then, there's been a flurry of publications in the scientific media and millions of articles in public media. You can see some here, a paper on the stratigraphy and Anthropocene, another, when did the Anthropocene begin, a mid-20th century boundary level. A book was produced, Stratigraphic Basis for the Anthropocene. The editors are the leaders of the Anthropocene Working Group, which is in the Quaternary Subcommission of the International Commission on Stratigraphy. I was invited to present a contribution, and mine focused on fundamental issues that must be addressed by the task group, most of which still have not been addressed by the task group. You can see how the idea spread throughout the sciences, and not just physical sciences, but it's biological sciences, but also social sciences. We have here an article, The Anthropocene Concept in Ecology and Conservation, Microbiology of the Anthropocene. In this Scientific America article, you can see one of the ideas for marking the beginning of the Anthropocene. Nuclear blast may prove best marker of humanity's geologic record. Or an article in Science, The Human Layer. Most of these articles talk about an epoch, a new era, but none talk about a stratigraphic record except in general terms. Here's more. Researchers propose Earth's Anthropocene age of humans began with fallout and plastics. Anthropocene epoch for Earth etches human impacts in stone. Here's an article from a newspaper from San Sebastian in northern Spain. And to the right, you'll see the number of published items and citations on the Anthropocene in the last few years, numbering in the many thousands each year. And even this journal, the Journal of the Marxist Literary Group. The article is titled "The Anthropocene is Fetishism." So you can see how widely this term has spread most recently. Here's an article from Nature in March 2015 on the human age. And most recently, these articles in Science, to which I'll address my attention a little later. The Anthropocene is functionally and stratigraphically distinct from the Holocene. We will examine that. I was forced, based on what I consider misrepresentations of the nature and history of the units formally established by ICS, I felt I had to respond to those misrepresentations. And with Lucy Edwards of the U.S. Geological Survey, we published this article this last year, actually in February, in the journal GSA Today. The purpose of ICS is to actually, it has one purpose, to set limits to the chronostratigraphic units that make up the International Chronostratigraphic Chart. These are material bodies of rock, stratigraphic sections that are out there in nature that we study today and that we sample and that we take data from, stratigraphic information from. We place those in an order controlled by the principle of superposition and originally using the principle of faunal succession to establish their relative time sequence. Those units have names that you see here. They're of different ranks: stage, series, and system. When we speak of time in the past, though, we're not speaking of material rock units. We're interpreting what has occurred in the past in Earth's history. We want to refer to this in terms of time, but our only knowledge of time of Earth's history comes from the rock record, comes from those material units, those chronostratigraphic units that we establish. When we speak of time in the past, then we're talking in terms of geologic time, and we have the geologic time scale. And when we calibrate numerical ages for the boundaries between these units, then we have a numerical geologic time scale. This concept, this dual concept of material rock units, or chronostratigraphic units, or time stratigraphic units, and geologic time, time of the past, and expressing it, this dual classification was formalized in 1881 in the Second International Geological Congress, and it's been with us since then. It's presented in all introductory textbooks on stratigraphy and on historical geology. There's national stratigraphic guides. We have these two systems of units: Cambrian system, Cambrian period. Cambrian system are all the stratiform rocks that we interpret as having accumulated during a specific interval of time, whereas the Cambrian period is when we talk about that time in the past. An example of the reason the Commission on Stratigraphy was really formed, given its main goal, is shown here in this diagram. In the left-hand column, you'll see the classic Silurian overlain by the Devonian Old Red Sandstone. That Silurian is Murchison Silurian. It was defined where the shales with graptolites give rise to the red sandstones of the Old Red Sandstone. Later, working in the south of England, Murchison and Sedgwick recognized carbonate, marine carbonate rocks that they considered, based on their stratigraphic position, as time correlative with the Old Red Sandstone, and they gave the name Devonian to that. The concept of the top of the Silurian, and thus the base of the Devonian, was at that boundary at the base of the Old Red Sandstone. But later, as they worked southward into Europe and recognized and established stratigraphic successions, as you see there, eventually workers far south in Bohemia found graptolite successions that extended much higher stratigraphically than they did in England. In England, in the type area, the top of the Silurian was considered to be the last of the graptolites. So what was to be done? Were graptolites, their last extinction, to be considered as the boundary, in which case it would be stratigraphically much higher? So as you can see, in different regions, there were different interpretations on where to place the boundary between the Silurian and Devonian, as you see in the most left-hand column of that chart. And this problem existed with all the systems up until the mid-1900s, when the Commission on Stratigraphy was formed to resolve this problem, to come up with a single formal definition to be used globally as a boundary between successive chronostratigraphic units, whether they were systems, series, or stages. You can see in this diagram illustrates two important points on which stratigraphy is based. One is the principle of superposition. That's how we view our stratigraphic sequences, and we use that vertical succession to classify the rocks and subdivide them. The other is the principle of fossil succession, which is used to make comparisons, time interpretations of rock units, stratigraphic intervals, from one locality to another. Most of the units, classic chronostratigraphic units, were defined in type sections or type areas, but without boundaries defined. In almost all cases, the type areas for successive units were in different areas, different locations, as you see in the left-hand side of the chart. With further study, what was shown is, as you see here, demonstrated by a succession of units we call stages, each defined at a different locality. With extensive work over the years, it was discovered that because boundaries were not set, because boundaries were often marked by unconformities, that the classic stratigraphic units, successive units, overlapped or had gaps between them, just like differences in definitions as with the Silurian-Devonian boundary. How could this be resolved? The concept of the boundary stratotype was set up, that within a succession, a stratigraphic section that spanned the boundary interval, a specific horizon would be chosen to define the boundary. It would be characterized by a stratigraphic signal at that level, but to correlate, which is an interpretive process, would require the careful evaluation of all stratigraphic signals in the boundary interval, as well as to the sections and other areas to which that boundary would be correlated. There was another purpose to the work of the Commission on Stratigraphy, and the Ordovician is an excellent example of that. On this diagram, for example, those numbers you see refer to the sites of the GSSPs, that is our reference sections for the boundaries for the stages and series that compose the Ordovician system, as well as the lower and upper boundary of the Ordovician system. You see how widespread they are. But also, with this paleogeography, there were many endemic fossils on which the original subdivisions of the Ordovician system were defined. They did not work outside of the type area in Great Britain. As a result, what you see here is entirely different stratigraphic classifications for each of the major paleogeographic regions of the world. Imagine you're a structural geologist wanting to correlate rocks in the Ordovician, and you're faced with this kind of stratigraphic complexity. What are these stratigraphers doing? Well, what the Subcommission on Ordovician Stratigraphy decided was that the original British series, Tremadoc, Arenig, Llanvern, Caradoc, Ashgiel, weren't useful. Nor were any of the regional series. But Ordovician stratigraphers had worked out stratigraphic successions worldwide. They knew the stratigraphic record. The idea then was to find those stratigraphic levels that offer the best, most reliable opportunities for worldwide correlation, to evaluate those levels, and then use those to mark boundaries of new stages and series for the Ordovician, as well as the lower and upper boundaries of the Ordovician system. And you can see the results in the right-hand chart here. You can see the GSSPs listed in the center column. Each boundary is defined on the lowest occurrence of a single species of graptolite or conodont, which are the biostratigraphically key index fossils for the Ordovician. The Stratotype sections are widespread, from Scotland to United States to China to Australia. To help other geologists, the Ordovician Subcommission produced a correlation chart like this, with the new global units shown on the right and their correlation of all the regional classifications to those global units. Within 4 years of these units being established, Ordovician stratigraphers worldwide have accepted them and used them regularly. The point I want to make about our work and our units is that our units are characterized, really established on their stratigraphic content. You see, here's the lower part of the Cretaceous. There's no GSSP, no lower boundary has been defined for the Cretaceous system, nor the lower Cretaceous series, nor the Berriasian, Valangian, Hatoverian, and Barremian stages. They do not have GSSPs, but they're formal units because they have stratigraphic content, as you can see there, by the zonations that are shown, the magnetostratigraphy, sea level changes. They have stratigraphic content. All we're doing with GSSPs is setting limits to the stratigraphic content. The boundary itself does not really establish a unit. And that's a problem with the manner in which the Anthropocene is presented. Most of the literature talks about the boundary, what's going to define the beginning. The question is what is the stratigraphic content? For those boundaries, we call them global stratotype sections and points, a specific level in a specific stratigraphic section. You can see there's a long list of criteria. Number one, it must be selected in a section representing essentially continuous deposition. The worst possible choice is an unconformity. The two most important criteria are shown in red. The fossil content should be abundant, distinctive, well-preserved, and represent a fauna and a flora as cosmopolitan and as diverse as possible. The reason for this is that faunal succession, our fossil record, is unidirectional. Each level within it is unique, in contrast to paleomagnetic reversals, isotope excursions, which have no particular distinctive feature on them to recognize exactly where they are in the stratigraphic succession. That is done by the fossil record. And the last point here, to assure its acceptance and use in earth sciences, a boundary stratotype should be selected to contain as many specific marker horizons or other attributes favorable for long-distance time correlation as possible. Proposals come out of subcommissions or out of working groups and subcommissions that carry out the investigations. Those groups are composed of specialists that have incredible experience on those units under consideration. If a proposal gains a 60% or greater majority yes vote, then a proposal is approved and moves upward to the ICS Bureau, which is the executive officers and the chairs of all the subcommissions. And there's a subcommission for every interval from the Precambrian to the Quaternary. They discuss and evaluate the proposal. If they approve it by greater than 60% majority vote, it moves to the IUGS Executive Committee that evaluates the proposal, mainly checking that all ICS procedures and statutes were followed. And if they approve it, we say it's ratified. It becomes an international geologic standard then. The level in the section must be marked, and the GSSP proposal that's ratified must be published, typically in episodes. This process takes time. It involves discussion and votes at different levels, but it's that process that gives the legitimacy to the GSSPs and the units they find as global geo-standards. Let me give you an example here with a stage in the Cambrian. If you look at this diagram, you'll see in red the Jingshanian stage. The Cambrian stratigraphers are redoing the Cambrian times geological units, and this Geosongian stage is defined at the lowest occurrence of a specific species of agnostic trilobites. Now, you don't go to any stratigraphic section and find that lowest occurrence and say there's the boundary. Correlation to the stratotype section, which is located in China, and that boundary level is an interpretive process. You can see, you find an occurrence of that species in another section. You do not know where it is within the range of that species. What one must do is evaluate all the stratigraphic signals in the boundary interval. Note the succession of them, the intervals of overlap, the succession of first and last appearances, and using those, evaluate those same criteria in a section being correlated to the stratotype section. And on that basis, the boundary can be placed in other successions with varying degrees of accuracy depending on the stratigraphic signals present. This is a point I want to make. This is an interpretive process using stratigraphic signals in stratigraphic sections, working with rocks we can go out and stand on and map and describe, and stratigraphic information that comes from samples that are taken for lithology, fossils, chemistry, geophysical signals. Recently, we're considering a GSSP proposal that will define the base of the Chattian stage, which is the upper stage of the Oligocene series. Again, I show you the amount of stratigraphic information we have for the Oligocene. The question is where to put the boundaries. Those terms have been used. Each of those intervals have stratigraphic content. How do we set the limits? And in the proposal for the GSSP, that boundary is placed at this level. You can see the detailed stratigraphy, the sampling intervals for different fossil groups, the magnetostratigraphy, the key biostratigraphic events, and the level at which the boundary has been defined. And you can see with a wealth of stratigraphic signals in that boundary interval, once it's been defined, that level has great potential for reliable long-distance correlation. Here's an example for the base of the Jurassic system, which was just defined and the GSSP marked in the year 2011. The transition from the Triassic to the Jurassic involves a stratigraphic quiet interval. There are few stratigraphic signals. There's a time of great volcanic outpourings and changes in ocean chemistry. Carbonate succession ceased. You get shales with few fossils in them, few stratigraphic signals. The stratotype section is in the northern calcareous Alps of Western Austria. It's placed at this level of the first occurrence of that ammonite, which paleontologists consider to be the oldest Jurassic ammonite. There are other stratigraphic signals, not a lot, but within sections in several different regions, there's a strong excursion in carbon isotope values, ratios that can help to correlate that boundary level. Here's the stratotype section itself. You see, here's the Triassic, slightly overturned, all carbonate. Here's the boundary interval that's shale, and over here is the Jurassic, which is carbonate. It's in this area that lowest ammonite was found, together with the carbon isotope excursions and other fossils of Triassic, latest Triassic, earliest Jurassic age, and on which the boundary was placed. You can see the stratotype section has been excavated, fenced off. Unfortunately, it's buried under about 10 meters of snow every winter, but still it's covered in the autumn and uncovered in the spring. This is Axel van Hildebrandt driving in the golden spike into the bed that marks the base of the Jurassic and thus the top of the Triassic. There's the golden cap on top of it. This is an international geostandard. And of course, once we have a ceremony like this, we have a little celebration afterwards. I think the best looking GSSP golden spike, we call it, is that produced for 2 GSSPs in a section of Paleocene strata at Zumaya, Spain. Here we have Stokio Molina, the chair of the Paleogene Subcommission at the time, pounding in the golden spike. Behind him is the governor of Guipúzcoa province. Behind him is the mayor of the town of Zumaya, myself, and the colleague that led the team that investigated that section. The beauty of having politicians here is that I can tell them, this is an international geostandard. It's in your territory. You have to preserve it. You have to maintain this area. Scientists need to come and sample it. It's your responsibility to take care of it. And they take great pride in that. They love this. This is not controversial. And when they come, the politicians come out to do this, the journalists come with them, and they love it. Here the plaque is unveiled. There's the top of the golden spike. That rock hammer you see for scale is only this big. Here is the plaque itself. So we are establishing formal global geostandards and marking them. This is a team, this is the purpose of our dedication ceremony, to recognize the team that did the investigations on this section and produced the proposal for this successful GSSP. China takes great pride in their GSSPs that are located there. And this one's special. This is for the base of the Triassic, the Permian-Triassic boundary, where you also have the greatest mass extinction recorded, the greatest mass extinction in Earth's history. They've turned it into a geopark. At the entrance there, you see the strata represented, and at the top, models of the conodont element, that is the fossil, that is used, its lowest occurrence is used to place the boundary. You can see here again, this wonderful section. These Triassic strata, Permian strata to this level, Triassic above. There's outcrops all along the mountain. This is a geopark. This is a monument on the top of which, again, is a model of the skeletal element of the conodont species used to mark the boundary level. The boundary is actually right in here. And this is one of the few boundaries in a stratotype section in which there's many volcanic ash beds that provide numerical ages to get a very precise age on that, numerical age on that boundary. Turning to the Anthropocene, that volume that was produced on the stratigraphic record had this chart within it on the stratigraphic record. But a lot of this is not stratigraphy. Doesn't follow the principle of superposition. First category, anthropogenic deposits. Regional localized urban development, urbanization. Development of cities doesn't follow the principle of superposition. That's not strata. Anthroturbation, mining, or sculpting the ocean floor with dragging nets across the ocean floor for fishing. That's not stratigraphy. Minerals, we're producing new minerals, yes, but are they in the stratigraphic record? I could go through each of these and ask again and again, where's the stratigraphy? When you get down to the bottom, geochemical signatures. Here we have some that do exist. Within ice cores, there's changing concentrations of carbon dioxide, for example, or in speleothems. So there are some signals, but they have not been well documented except for those for ice cores. And as you can imagine, human impact on the Earth has existed as long as there's been substantial populations. We can go thousands of years back and show where agriculture and irrigation have destroyed water systems. And through time, as human populations have increased and dispersed across the Earth, so is human impact. So human impact is a very diachronous process. It cuts across time as it spreads over the Earth's surface. Now, the leaders of what is called the Anthropocene Working Group have published a lot of papers, and I have to take exceptions with them. You can see here the geologic time scale is based upon recognizing distinctive events within strata. For a new epoch to be formally established, either a GSSP needs to be selected or a date for its inception needs to be accepted, which is then ratified for the International Commission on Stratigraphy. First of all, what we establish in this case would be a new series, not a new epoch. And we have to have content. If we look towards the bottom, the last quote, rather, the boundaries between the units are decided on fundamental changes in the Earth system recorded in the rock record. Well, the lower boundaries of the Ordovician, Devonian, Carboniferous, and Permian systems are defined at the lowest occurrences of single species or subspecies of conodonts and graptolites in single continuous sections without facies changes. That's a misrepresentation that is presented by the leaders of the working group on the Anthropocene. And they are members of the of the Stratigraphic Committee of the Geological Society of London, and they are familiar. They have worked on the boundaries that supposedly define the series and stages of the Silurian. Here's what those are like. This man has his hand on the level chosen for the boundary that defines the base of the Talithian stage. There is no stratigraphic signal there. I asked, what's a stratigraphic signal? Well, there's a brachiopod collection several meters this way, and out of the quarry and down the road, there's another brachiopod collection. There is no change there. The leaders of the Anthropocene Working Group know that. Here is the section, stratotype section, for the base of the Wenlock series. This has created problems for Silurian stratigraphers worldwide. There's extinction of two different acritarchs and one conodon. There's no real change there at all. Here's the lower boundary of the Homerian stage of the Wenlock series. There's no fossils there in this little outcrop. You go up there where the spike is shown, and that's where a single specimen of a single species of graptolite was found. But you know, that level is within the loose material. It's within the eroded material. It's not even within bedrock. The leaders of the Anthropocene Working Group know these sections, and yet they continue to misrepresent the nature of the units. Here again, this was published in 2015. In defining any unit within the International Chronostratigraphic Chart, perhaps the most important aspect is fixing of the boundary. Now, here again, a misrepresentation. The emphasis on strata is significant. Earth history is formalized in the International Chronostratigraphic Chart as a dual hierarchy of time units. One known as the geochronologic time scale is simply of time itself. For instance, using this, one speaks of the Cambrian period. The second parallel system is of chronostratigraphy. The equivalent here is a Cambrian system which comprises all the strata deposited during the Cambrian period. That's backwards. We have rock units. We subdivide them to have contemporaneous bodies of rock. We interpret as contemporaneous. Then they represent geologic time. And not completely, because usually they're full of hiatuses. Again, this idea comes from a proposal they made back in 2004, that if you have two successive GSSPs, each one is a unique point in time. So two successive GSSPs define a time interval, then the time stratigraphic or chronostratigraphic interval are all the strata that accumulated between those 2 points in time. So first, you have two GSSPs that define a time unit, like the Cambrian period. Once you have that, then you work in your rocks, correlate them in, and that's your Cambrian system. This proposal was thoroughly discussed at a workshop of all the subcommission chairs in Prague in 2010, and it was rejected unanimously. Why? First of all, there were system series and stages long before there were GSSPs. The International Stratigraphic Guide states the units of geologic time during which chronostratigraphic units were formed are called geochronologic units. You have to have the stratigraphy first. The Cretaceous system, as I've mentioned, doesn't have a GSSP, yet we still have a universally recognized formal unit that is widely correlated because it has stratigraphic content. The International Stratigraphic Guide provides extensive guidelines for establishing chronostratigraphic units, but no guidelines whatsoever for establishing geochronologic units, other than that given in number 2 above. And finally, as I've pointed out, GSSPs for successive units are often located in geographically widely separated regions. How do you know that two GSSPs are successive? How do you know that? Only because we already have all the stratigraphic sections worked out, all the correlations made. We've done all the chronostratigraphy. Then we can pick boundaries that define time units. Again, this is just showing again their statements that counteract this. And that's a problem I have. This misrepresentation is widespread, even through the most prestigious journals. And unfortunately, have had to be the one that says, no, That's not correct. In my paper, in the book, Stratigraphic Basis of the Anthropocene, I asked several questions. Is the Anthropocene a concept in search of a distinctive stratigraphic record? Should the base of the Anthropocene be defined on a stratigraphic signal, or instead should its beginning be defined on a date in human history? Is the Anthropocene a unit of Earth history or human history? And so often what it is a projection into the future. What is the usefulness of Anthropocene as a material unit to be represented on maps? Has a change to a human-dominated Earth system overwhelmed the natural Earth system, or might geologic processes, both internal, volcanic eruptions, and external, asteroid impacts, still overwhelm the human influence? What is, after all, the conceptual basis of the International Chronostratigraphic Chart? And will the term Anthropocene have value, even if not ratified as a formal chronostratigraphic geochronologic unit? William Rudiman, who has studied environmental change induced by humans and the history of that, says, does it really make sense to define the start of a human-defined era millennia after most forests in arable regions have been cut for agriculture, most rice paddies have been irrigated, and carbon dioxide and methane concentrations have been rising because of agriculture and industrial emissions? So again, the push now is define the Anthropocene as the year 1945 with the first atomic explosion. What does that do then to the human impact that occurred earlier? Do we still refer to that to Holocene? And if so, then what really does the term Anthropocene connotate? I'd like to show you the data that's presented, the stratigraphic information. Top left-hand chart. Annual production of aluminum, concrete, plastic, synthetic fibers. Is that stratigraphy? No. Below it, spheroidal carbonaceous particles arising typically from diesel exhaust. The gray area, global black carbon production. That's not stratigraphy. The lines, though, are where this occurs in lake sediments. And you can see the increasing trend. Yes, there's a human impact, but where would you put a boundary? If you select 1945, you're in the middle of those increasing trends. How do you tell in a single section and compare it to other sections where you are in the trends? On the right, we see perturbations of nitrogen. But again, some of that, the red lines in the lower right-hand chart, is global nitrate emissions, global nitrogen fertilizer production. That's not stratigraphy. And all of these curves are rising, and what they reflect are population growth and human consumption. Here's some real data. This is from ice cores. You can see in the top right-hand column, right-hand figure, where the boundary is placed, a vertical dashed line. Note, again, we're on trends. We're not at specific stratigraphic signals. The desire is to push is for mid-20th century signal at a time when human consumption, human production increased dramatically, and of course the Earth was greatly affected at that time. But what is the stratigraphy? What is the stratigraphic record? 1945 is selected also because soon after that, radioisotopes produced by nuclear explosions started accumulating in ice cores and lakes where sedimentation occurs. Do we see stratigraphic sections presented that show this? No, look what we have here. The black bars represent atmospheric tests. The lines you see are measurements from the atmosphere. We don't see stratigraphic sections. We don't see this data shown in that kind of way. The stratigraphic record is not even used, is it? Here, oh, the sixth great mass extinction. You hear a lot of talk of the Anthropocene's producing the sixth mass extinction. Yeah, there's extinctions going on. Are they in the stratigraphic record? Where does that information come from? It comes from biologists and botanists, ecologists that are studying this process as it goes. Even a million years from now, what will you see in the stratigraphic record of this? Almost nothing. because most of what we focus on are terrestrial animals and plants, which tend to be extremely poorly represented in the fossil record. Yeah, we're changing the Earth, but what is the stratigraphic record? What we're seeing shown here largely is not stratigraphy. Here's some. This is the ice core data. You can see the fluctuations through the Holocene. And here at the very end is, yes, the increased concentration of CO2 generated by the combustion of fossil fuels. This is example. This is a science paper, lead paper in science. This is an example of the boundary between Holocene and Anthropocene. You can see where it's marked. There's your Anthropocene, a couple millimeters, maybe a couple centimeters of mud, unconsolidated sediment. What bothers me about this diagram is where's your stratigraphic signals? Where in this core are you showing, have you sampled for the carbonaceous particles or the radioisotopes? Where's the stratigraphy there? This is as a result of glaciers retreating and the nature of deposition in the lakes that are produced changing. Well, at what stage were the glaciers retreating here? Before the beginning of what's called the Anthropocene, at the boundary, later? Nothing is made here of that, nor how would you correlate this from one lake core to another lake core, where it's likely to be diachronous. I think the Anthropocene is a term that's like the Renaissance. Both refer to richly documented revolutionary human activities that are dated in the Gregorian calendar. Both carry significant connotation. Although a precise date in calendar years is not specified for the beginning of the Renaissance, the term is established and conveys a singular meaning of the content of that period, where it began, how it evolved, and how it spread. The same applies to the term Anthropocene if its concept is human impact on the Earth's surface. We can correlate and date where it began, how it's moved, how it's spread over the Earth. No doubt scholars have argued over the singular human creation, whether in literature, architecture, or art, that initiated the Renaissance. But there's no need to define its beginning because the dates and locations of all the creations are well established. Furthermore, it'd be contrary to current practice to define the beginning at a single point in time because it is a cultural movement. If you were to define the beginning of the Renaissance at 1500, where the works of the Renaissance spread widely, that's in the lifetime of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. Their early work would be pre-Renaissance, their later work would be Renaissance. And as I said, the same applies for human impact. Just as with the Renaissance, in the Anthropocene, we have specific dates for human impact, whether it's a hydroelectric dam, a gold mine, dramatic increase in carbon combustion during the Industrial Revolution, the growth of megacities, the clearing of rainforests. We have all this documented quite well with direct human observations and direct human calendars. This is not stratigraphy. The only reason to define a boundary seems to be to give it credence as a unit of a geologic timescale. Again, is the Anthropocene stratigraphy? The timing and duration of events, both human-induced and geologic, are expressed in terms of Gregorian calendar. For most, not only is the year known, but also the month, day, hour, and second. Events and processes are directly observed. With the starting date of 1945, the Anthropocene is within a single human lifespan, and all the events are common knowledge. They've been observed by humans. We've seen how cities have grown. I've lived most of my life in Los Angeles, in California. I've seen the state's population go from less than 10 million to almost 40 million. You can see that spread. I've observed it through my lifetime. And a diachronous boundary for something like the Anthropocene is not of any concern, just as for the Renaissance. All the timing of all events is known, and so too is their dispersal through space and time. After my article in GSA Today, the next issue had this article, the 2014-2015 Pahoa lava flow crisis in Hawaii. Note, it doesn't say the Anthropocene lava flow crisis, nor would it say the Quaternary or the Holocene. Why? Because we're dating events, whether they're geologic, biological, or human, in terms of the human calendar. Here you can see the individual lava flows, the bodies of rocks, are dated by the actual date they flowed. Changes in the topography, again, are measured over time in direct human observations. Historical earthquakes, those are major events. They're all expressed in terms of years, not in terms of Anthropocene or Holocene or Quaternary. So my question to you, as scientists with National Geological Surveys, you work with the Earth. You're students of the Earth. You know its 4 billion years of history. You see the present Earth system in terms of that context. You see the interrelationships of in the Earth system and the human impact on them. You deal with government rules and regulations to mitigate or prevent serious and deleterious human impact. You're the ones that directly work with this. And that Anthropocene Working Group, I don't think, has talked with you about this. In your experience, the questions I ask are, is there a stratigraphic record, a material record, on which to establish a formal chronostratigraphic unit? And secondly, would recognition of such a unit be useful for your work? In spite of my criticism of the manner in which the work of ICS has been presented, I have an open mind. Show me the stratigraphic record. Show me the usefulness of the units. Make the justification. If you don't want it as a chronostratigraphic unit, if you want ICS to formally recognize it regardless as something different, then say that. We're open to consider that, but please don't misrepresent our record. But again, I welcome your opinions. Write me. My email address is there, and you can find it at the ICS website, www.stratigraphy.org. It's important that the entire geoscience community be involved in this because the public media has promoted this idea almost worldwide. And it's important that geoscientists have direct input on this. I finish with this chart that's sitting on your desk. Besides producing the chart, we've been producing translations so that there is a common standard spelling of translation of the formal names of the units for each language. Some countries have more than one language. We produce for Spain a Castellano version, a Basque version, and a Catalan version, for example. But we wanted a version for Spanish in the Americas. It is a complicated process. My good friend, Juan Carlos Gutierrez Marcos, has collaborated with Jorge Gomez Topias, speaking with many of the National Geological Surveys of Latin America to try to produce, if possible, a single chart. They've done a lot of work. They've come to this stage. Now this is being distributed to all of you here, again, to seek your opinions on this. Do you agree with the spellings that are used here, especially the endings of the formal names? Do you have problems with it? Please let us know. And this can then become, again, a standard, not only of the ICS chronostratigraphic chart, but also as a translation of those names for publications in Spanish of the Americas. Thank you so much for your attention.
Tenemos un espacio para preguntas.
And it's more a comment than a question. I think it is really important to see the difference between a time scale and a real human achievement, which is called the calendar. Even so, we don't know all of the calendars that our ancestors maybe 140,000 years ago already had, but they counted the days, as you said. Thank you.
I would make one comment. Yeah. Gives me one opportunity to make one additional comment. Many proponents of the Anthropocene say, yes, but 500,000 years ago, geologists will see a stratigraphic record of human impact. My response is, ICS is purpose is not to make a time scale for people 100,000 years from now. We're trying to make it for geologists today. And also 100,000 years from now, we won't need to have looked at the stratigraphic record because we have direct human observations of the Earth system, recorded in human notes by instruments. You go to the library, you go to the internet to get that information. There'd be no need to go to the stratigraphic record. Thank you.
¿Tenemos otra pregunta?
Thank you for this very informative presentation. This is the first time that I heard of this. I'm new to it, so please forgive me if I make a mistake. But I want to make a comment and then a question. Is that I assume we humans are living on this earth, on this planet, we are living behind a record. Like I've been to places in the ocean, in the beach here in Colombia or in rivers, where we can find some layers with waste, with trash, and they are solidified. They are almost lithified. You could expect them to become real rocks in a few years. And I've been as well into the dump of this city, which is in the south, and there you can find the waste that is carried from the city to this place. It's very solid, and it's very hard. You can even like hit it with a hammer, and it doesn't break easily. So you expect that this record will become in the future the record of some, you don't want to call it Anthropocene, it will be the record of the human impact on the planet. My question is, if this kind of record doesn't represent the Anthropocene, what else? What would you suggest? Because we assume that as we are seeing the climate change, we can maybe do some isotopes geochemistry, and we'll find a peak, a rise in the CO2 concentration, and maybe we are going to find a flooding surface in some places that might be mappable throughout the whole planet. I think it's just a question. What would you suggest? Because it seems that we humans are leaving an impact on this planet, and I don't think geology is not reflecting it. I think we see it. Yeah, thank you.
No, I appreciate your question very much, and it's a very good question. We are having an impact, but I have several responses. If a group comes to the Commission on Stratigraphy and wants us to formalize a term, number one, they ought to not misrepresent the nature of our units. And in this case, it's being knowingly misrepresented, and knowingly misrepresented in the public media. That is an ethical question. To me, an ethical transgression of those that are the strongest proponents of the Anthropocene. Yes, we are leaving materials on the Earth's surface. I agree with you. But you know, we've got one of the largest landfills in the world in the suburbs of Los Angeles, La Puente landfill. We know it's there. We have human records of when it was developed, what was put into it over time, its history. We don't need to go and use that and say, oh, there's a mark of human history. We know it's there already. Yes, there are some, like you say, lithified sediment with indications of human waste within it. Again, those are often well known. For example, off the coast of Los Angeles is a deposit of DDT on the ocean floor where a Monsanto chemical company produced it and let its waste go. We know it's there, we're dealing with it, we know the effect, we're studying it, we'll core down into it, but we know it's there. The question is what is the usefulness of the Anthropocene when you can say instead, that's a mine dump by Newmont Mining Company from 1925 to 1930. Which is more precise and useful? We have such Hadrian's Wall, left by humans, it's still there. We call it Hadrian's Wall. We know the year it was built and why it was built. What is the advantage of saying, oh, that's Anthropocene? On the other hand, with regard to your question, I am open to seeing the stratigraphic record documented and that presented to us. Unfortunately, we're not getting a presentation of a stratigraphic basis. The hard work has not been done, as been done with the rest of the stratigraphic units, of detailed study of sections, localities worldwide to put together that stratigraphic unit on which to justify a unit. That's the other problem. If that was put together, if we had the stratigraphic record and it was documented, we could say, yes, it looks substantial, we should recognize it, fine, that would be good. So your question is a valid question. We are leaving a human impact, but again, we're not making, our USGS is not funding us to define units that will be used 100,000 years from now. They're supporting us to actually set formal boundaries to the chronostratigraphic units that we have from the Precambrian up to the Holocene. I hope I've answered your question, but I can see your concern. And this is a concern, the human impact. I have sons. I want grandkids. What kind of world are we leaving for them? Think of what's going to happen when sea level rises and low-lying areas densely populated or flooded. The human tragedies will be far greater than we're having now. This is of major concern. But if we need to recognize that with the term, and you want us to, we'll consider it, but maybe not as a chronostratigraphic unit. The problem is a misrepresentation that has occurred. I think you can agree with that. That's not the right approach to come to ICS with. IUGS oversees this. We have formal guidelines. We have formal criteria. And you think if you're going to go to an organization and ask for your favorite thing formally recognized, you should know the rules, understand the rules, and not try to misrepresent them, especially through the scientific media and public media. Unfortunately, I have to be in the position of saying this. I'm forced to be in that position. Thank you very much for your attention.
Professor Stan, the Colombian Geological Survey gives you the symbol of the symposium in recognition for the conference, and again, thank you for coming to Colombia for a second time.